My name is Samuel Hayes, and I'm 61 years old, and I've learned that sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. It happened one evening during dinner. My daughter-in-law suddenly slammed her fork down and said, "Either give your room to my parents, or pack your things." The room went quiet. My son looked down. Not a word of defense. Not even a glance in my direction. I just smiled. I wasn't upset. Not anymore. I'd spent years giving, forgiving, and shrinking myself just to keep the peace. But that night I finally understood. Peace doesn't live in a house. It lives in you. So I packed my things and left with my head held high. Before I tell you what happened when they saw me again, please like this video and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth will be shocking. The smell of roasted lamb used to mean comfort in my house, but that evening it felt heavy, like something burning, even though nothing was. I sat at the dining table, across from my son, Daniel, and his wife, Clara. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, were there too, laughing louder than anyone else, as if it were their home. I said little, just cut my food quietly. Clara was in one of her moods. Her eyes kept shifting toward me, sharp and restless. She'd already complained that morning about how tight the house felt with me living there. I ignored it, just like I ignored many things. Halfway through dinner, the conversation stopped. The air turned still. Then suddenly, Clara slammed her fork down on the table. "Either give your room to my parents," she shouted, "or pack your things." Her voice cut through the room like glass. Daniel froze, staring at his plate. Mr. Grant looked at me, half smiling, as if he expected me to argue. Mrs. Grant folded her arms and sighed dramatically. I didn't say a word. I placed my fork down, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and looked at Clara. Her eyes were full of victory, like she'd finally said what she'd been waiting weeks to say. "All right, Clara," I said quietly, "if that's what you want." The table went silent. Even Daniel looked up, confused. He probably expected me to fight back, to shout, to remind everyone that this was my house, built with my hands, paid for with my years of work. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that sometimes silence is louder than anger. Clara blinked. "Wait, you're actually agreeing?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, it's your house now, isn't it?" I stood up, pulled out my chair slowly, and walked toward my room. Behind me, I could feel their eyes following me. Clara probably thought she'd won, but in truth, I wasn't angry. I was awake. Inside my room, I sat on the edge of the bed looking around. Every corner held a memory. The picture of my late wife by the window, the bookshelf I'd built myself, the old chair where I used to read to Daniel when he was small, and now I was being told to give it up. I laughed quietly, not out of sadness, but because I realized something. They weren't pushing me out. They were freeing me. Outside my door, I could hear them talking in low voices. I didn't listen. I just reached for my notebook, the one I'd kept since my wife passed, and wrote down a single line. People who think they're taking something from you often end up giving you something better. When I turned off the light that night, I felt no anger, only peace. As I lay in bed, I whispered into the dark, "You'll understand soon enough, Clara." When I woke up the next morning, the house already sounded different. It wasn't the same quiet hum I'd grown used to. Instead, there were voices, Clara's parents, talking loudly in the living room, laughing like they'd lived there all their lives. I sat up slowly, staring at the familiar ceiling. For years, that room had been my space of peace. Now, I wasn't even sure if I should still call it mine. As I walked into the hallway, I noticed they'd moved things around already. My framed photographs, the ones of Daniel as a little boy, were stacked on a side table, half covered by a coat. Mrs. Grant was using my favorite teapot, the one my late wife loved, and she didn't even ask. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said casually, like she was greeting a neighbor, not the man who owned the house. "Morning," I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Clara came out of the kitchen, holding her coffee mug. "Oh, Dad and Mom wanted to make themselves comfortable," she said, smiling a little too widely. I hope that's okay." I just nodded. "Of course." Daniel walked in a few moments later. He gave me a small smile, but didn't say anything either. His eyes darted between Clara and me like a man caught in a storm he didn't want to admit existed. The rest of the day went by in awkward silence. Wherever I went, I seemed to be in someone's way. The living room was suddenly too crowded. My chair was now Mr. Grant's reading spot. My radio, the one I used to listen to every evening, had been unplugged and moved. I went out to the garden to breathe. The air was cool, but my thoughts were warmer than ever. I could have shouted. I could have reminded them that every brick of that house was paid for by me, not them. But something inside me said, "Don't." That afternoon, I took a walk to clear my head. I ended up at my old friend's shop, Mr. Foster, a real estate agent I'd known for years. We shared a pot of tea, and I told him, without much detail, that I might be looking for something small and quiet. He smiled, flipping through a small file. "There's a nice little place across your street. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. It's been empty for months." Across the street. The words stayed in my head all the way home. When I got back, Clara and her parents were sitting on the couch, talking about how retirement homes are better for old people anyway. They didn't even lower their voices. I walked past them without a word and went straight to my room. That night, I wrote in my notebook again, "They think they're taking my home, but maybe they're showing me where my peace really is." Then I placed the pen down, looked around the room one last time, and smiled. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt calm, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. From that day on, I decided not to complain anymore. Instead, I started observing. Every word, every glance, every sigh from Clara or her parents told me more than I needed to know. I became invisible in my own home, and strangely, that made planning easier. Clara spent most mornings shopping or meeting her friends. Daniel worked long hours at the firm. That left the house to the Grants, who loved rearranging everything they could touch. One afternoon, I watched Mrs. Grant replace the photo of my late wife in the hallway with a painting of flowers. She didn't even notice me watching. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. The following day, I visited Mr. Foster's office. He was surprised to see me so soon. "I'd like to see that house you mentioned," I said. He nodded quickly. "The one across your street?" "Yes." We walked over together that afternoon. It was a small brick house with a white fence and a bright front window that looked directly at my old home. The grass was a bit overgrown, and the porch needed a little work, but the moment I stepped inside, it felt right. It reminded me of peace, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The rooms were modest, a small living space, a clean kitchen, and a quiet study room with sunlight pouring through the curtains. I could already imagine my old drafting desk sitting by that window, papers spread, pen in hand. "I'll take it," I told him without hesitation. Mr. Foster smiled. "You sure you don't want to think about it?" "No need," I replied. "It feels like home already." We handled the paperwork that week. I made the payment in full quietly. No one at home knew a thing. I didn't mention a word to Daniel or to Clara. Why would I? They had already made it clear that I was just an extra presence in their lives. A few days later, I started packing. Not in a hurry, on just one box at a time. Books first, then old clothes, then the small keepsakes that actually mattered. Each night, I'd write a little note in my notebook before bed. One of them said, "Silence isn't weakness, it's the sound of a plan forming." Meanwhile, Clara was getting more comfortable. She started telling her parents how she'd freshen up my old room soon. I could hear the excitement in her voice whenever she mentioned new curtains or furniture. She thought I'd already given up, but every time I passed the window and looked across the street, I'd see that little house waiting for me, like it already knew I was coming. And for the first time since that dinner, I slept peacefully. Because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't being pushed out of my home. I was quietly walking into a better one. The morning I moved out was brighter than usual. The kind of morning where the sunlight falls softly on everything, as if even the sky wants peace. I woke up early, long before anyone else. I brewed my tea, took one last look around my room, and smiled. Every item I truly cared about was already packed neatly in boxes. My life, my memories, fit into just a few of them. Around 8 o'clock, the moving truck arrived. I met the driver outside and guided him quietly. We loaded the boxes into the back without much noise. I didn't want a scene, I wanted a clean, quiet exit. As we were finishing up, Clara walked out of the house, wearing her usual confident smile. She leaned against the doorway and crossed her arms. "Oh, you're really leaving then?" she asked, pretending to sound surprised. "I am," I said simply. "Well, I hope you find a place that suits you," she said, her tone polite but sharp underneath. "You know, something small and peaceful." I looked at her and smiled. "I already have." For a moment she frowned, unsure what I meant. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Daniel came out shortly after. His eyes looked tired, guilty even. He opened his mouth to say something, but Clara's parents stepped onto the porch, smiling and waving like people who just won a prize. I nodded politely, shook Daniel's hand and said, "Take care of yourself, son." He squeezed my hand tightly but still didn't say what I could see written all over his face: "I'm sorry." I climbed into the truck, sat in the front seat, and watched as the house slowly grew smaller behind me. Not once did I feel regret. Not once did I feel hate. Only calm. When the truck stopped, we were just across the street. My new house looked warm and waiting, sunlight glowing across the front steps. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The movers carried in the last of my boxes. When they left, I stood in the middle of my living room and took a deep breath. The air smelled like new paint and quiet mornings. I unpacked a few things right away: my wife's photo, my favorite chair, my notebook. I set them all by the big window that faced my old house. From there I could see everything: their front porch, the garden, even the dining room window. That evening I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window and watched them having dinner. They were laughing again, comfortable, completely unaware that I was right there, watching from my own home across the street. I didn't feel revenge, I felt peace. I closed my notebook that night after writing one line: "When people take your space, make a better one." And as I turned off the light, I smiled, because I knew the best part was yet to come. A week passed before anyone came to check on me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The first few days in my new home felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. I woke up to birds instead of arguments. I made my own breakfast exactly the way I liked it: soft eggs, strong coffee, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel lonely, but peaceful. I spent my morning setting up the house, little by little. My drafting desk went near the big window. From there I could see my old home perfectly. The same home I built with my hands decades ago, now filled with voices that didn't belong. It was strange at first, seeing it from the outside. I'd watch Clara water the plants in the garden I planted for my wife. Sometimes Daniel would carry groceries in, his shoulders tense, his eyes hollow. I could tell he wasn't as happy as he tried to look. Every evening I'd sit by the window, notebook in hand, tea beside me, watching life move on across the street. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing I'd left with my pride intact. One afternoon, as I was painting the fence, Mr. Foster stopped by. "So, how's the new place treating you, Sam?" he asked, grinning. I chuckled. "Feels like it's been waiting for me." He nodded, looking across at my old house. "They have no idea, do they?" I shook my head. "Not a clue. Let's keep it that way for now." We shared a laugh. Two old men who understood that not every victory needs a crowd. Some are best enjoyed in silence. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was in my study writing when I saw a delivery truck pull up in front of my old house. Clara, Daniel, and her parents came outside. The driver seemed confused and pointed toward my direction. I watched through the curtain, curious. After a moment, the driver pointed again, this time directly at my house. He must have delivered some mail or a parcel that showed my name and the new address. I could see Clara's confusion slowly turn into realization. Her face froze. Daniel looked stunned. Mrs. Grant covered her mouth, while Mr. Grant just stared, blinking rapidly. I stood there quietly, letting them absorb it. The truth was simple, but powerful. I hadn't gone far. I was right across the street, living peacefully, in a house that was now mine, not just by ownership, but by choice. I stepped closer to the window and opened the curtains fully. Clara saw me first. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. Then Daniel turned, following her gaze. He looked straight at me, and for a long second, we just stared at each other. I lifted my hand slowly and waved. Just a small, calm wave. Nothing dramatic. But that simple gesture said everything words couldn't. Mrs. Grant gasped, clutching her chest. Clara's face turned pale. Daniel just stood frozen, guilt and disbelief written all over him. I could almost hear the silence echoing across the street. After a moment I smiled softly and closed the curtain. Inside I laughed, not out of spite, but out of peace. I sat down at my desk and picked up my pen. My hand didn't shake. I wrote in my notebook. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and where they can see it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked around my new home. The walls glowed a warm orange, and for the first time in years, I felt free. No one could throw me out of here. No one could silence me in my own space. Later that evening, I heard a knock at the door. It was Daniel. He stood there looking unsure, his hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said quietly, You bought this place?" "I did." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Across the street?" "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "Close enough to remember, far enough to breathe." For a moment he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be, son. Just learn from it." He nodded again, and when he walked away, I felt something release inside me. Not anger, not pride, but closure. That night I sat by the window again, sipping my tea as the lights went out across the street. The old house no longer felt like a wound. It was just a house. And here, in this small new place, surrounded by quiet and light, I finally understood something simple. You don't need to raise your voice to prove your worth. Sometimes all you need to do is wave and let peace do the rest. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.